and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be diving into the very first step and actually trying to get our local little street tracker actually deployed in Google Cloud. But the first step, what we're going to do, if we come back to our next steps, the very first thing we wanted to do was right here, and that was when we make changes, we want to run this build slash test pipeline, which is going to build images. It's going to run tests on pushes to the main branch. So that's what we have here, and I'm going to actually describe that. I want to show, I've been working on this a little bit, and there's been a lot of figuring out how this works, and so I'm going to walk you through my work, and we're actually going to see that our current code right now is actually failing, and we're going to talk about why that is. So in order to push things to GitLab and get tests running, we're going to have this new file, and it's going to be in our parent directory, and it's going to be this gitlab-ci.yaml. And in that, we are going to be specifying some different stages. So for us, we're going to have two stages. We are going to have this build stage, and then we're going to have a test stage. This build stage, what this is going to be doing, think about it like we are actually going to be just doing a Docker build, right? So just like when we actually have our Docker compose, when we want to Docker compose up, that's going to turn all these on, and it's going to check all these dependencies out. So our web depends on the API, and the API depends on the database, and we're storing some different database variables or some environment variables. So that's very similar to how this GitLab, the CI process actually works. So the docs for this are on GitLab. Honestly, I used a lot of ChatGPT just to help me write this, but it was not instant. The first step, though, was actually just trying to figure out, well, how are we going to run these tests? Because as you guys know, if you're running our API actually uses Postgres. So how is our API going to actually use Postgres? And also our API needs to, it's running in a Docker container. So how does that work? We need to actually build our Docker container, right? We have this Docker file, and this all needs to run, and then our code needs to run within that, and then that's how it actually can communicate on these ports and stuff like that. So that was the first. So let's just go through this. So we have these two stages, build and test, and I'll walk you through what this first stage is going to look like. So the first stage is just build. We are going to be using the Docker image, and we are actually going to be using this Docker :din. And what that means is Docker in Docker. So it's a Docker within Docker itself. And the whole point of this build is to actually build that Docker file. And that way, if you see here in our next service, we're going to use this image, this API image that we're going to create in this build step. So essentially our build step is going to really just be building all of our Docker files. And if you can imagine, we might have many different services, and I'm extrapolating and imagining that our build step is going to build all these. So you might be looking at some of these and saying, what is this? So let's actually go through and figure this out. First off, if you can imagine, when we're doing a Docker build, where is this file going to be used? Now, we could have, in theory, went to our API and then actually did all these scripts at once. But essentially, you can't use, if you build something in this stage, it won't be accessible in this stage unless we actually push this up to a registry. And so what these variables are things that GitLab actually provides. I did not set any of this up, but we have our Docker registry for all of these. And so we just log in, Docker login, we build our image, and we're actually going to, so we've got, this is where it's going to be stored, this is what it's called, and then this is the actual, the commit reference. And so that way they're all going to be called this API image, but this is the actual, this is how to identify the differences between those. Then we're going to, so we have this new Docker, and we're going to actually push that up to the GitLab repository. And the other thing is, this only happens, we want this to happen every single time there is a change to our main branch. So if this runs, then we will actually, since these run in, these are multiple stages, so we'll first run build, and then we're gonna run our test step. And our test step is gonna be interesting. So first off, this is actually going to use this service, Postgres service. And so that's similar to our Docker Compose YAML, where we use this Postgres image. This is actually just gonna run a Postgres service for us. We might want to refactor these eventually, but these variables are actually going to be the defaults that Postgres service is actually going to use. So, and that's what we're doing here. We're setting the defaults for our Postgres service. And then, if you remember in our Docker Compose file, these were our environmental variables that we had actually set up on our database here. Well, these are the variables that we can actually, our API uses to connect. So they're actually identical for our cases. Then we have this image, right? This image, so we're saying, hey, when you start up this stage, I want you to use this Docker container, and that Docker container is the one that we built in our last step. So now that everything is set up, our Docker is running in this stage, we are going to run these scripts. So first, we are going to go into the directory. If you remember our Docker file, remember, this is our working directory in our Docker file for our API, where we've ran all these scripts. We want you to go into that file, and then we want you to, first, we're going to run our migrations. Because so eventually, if we had multiple services, maybe we might need like a migration service that would do this, and you wouldn't actually run maybe these steps until you've migrated everything beforehand. But for now, because the API is the only thing that's using this, we'll go into that, we'll make sure we migrate, and then we're going to run this new script called test CI that I actually went and made. So let's take a look at what this test CI is. So first, if we would have just run npm run test, we would have had to hit this Docker Compose run. Well, that doesn't make sense. We're already in a Docker container when we run this in our GitLab CI. So this test CI is simply going to run jest, and jest will return, and the goal, essentially what's going to happen is this is going to run, and this whole build phase, if jest completes with no errors, it's going to return a 1 or a 0, and if there is an error, it's going to return a 1 essentially. And so that's going to actually determine if our stage actually passes. So that's what this file is. Let's actually see. I've been, like I said, let's come back to these stages on GitLab now. So first, you'll see all of them. They're all named like this, and the first thing we can do is just go to build API. And so that's where I'm here, and this was a successful thing, but I wanted to show you actually what is going on in here. So the first thing is we're pulling the repository, we're going in and we can actually go and look at the difference. So we're in this build and we're saying, hey, use Docker. We're going to do this CD to our API, and we'll see that somewhere in here. There we go. So we're going to, so and the green, I guess, is what the actual commands are. So, oh yeah, and those with the $sign. So we're running our API, then we're logging in using this next command. So login succeeded. Now we're building, and that's what's going to take the most time here, where it's downloading all these files. And then we're going to push eventually. So this is still building. You'll see our Docker file actually running. Here's our working directory from our Docker file. We've got 6 steps. Now we're copying. Now we're npm installing. We're doing all these items. And then finally, we're going to do this Docker push here. And we can even see this Docker, this push refers to this repository. So I don't actually know about that. But it's possible that we could even go in and look at these. In fact, let's go out and go and see if this, oh, so it's not found if we use it like that. Okay, so it's preparing, it's pushed. Okay, so now this job has actually succeeded. So let's come back. And this is where we're going to see our failure here. And we'll look in, and this is going to lead us to our next video. So, oh, this is a different failure than I actually thought it would be. So our original failure, and this is kind of really what I'm expecting here. I'm wondering what this is what this is here. CD user API, and this is saying that there is no such file or directory. It's very possible that I changed these to be a Gitlab local runner, and I think I'm going to turn that back off now. Yeah, I think we'll probably, yeah, I don't, it doesn't look like this is, yeah, see, this is actually on my local machine here. And so because this is running, we're running bash, we might need to actually set up these things to be running in Docker. But for now, we're going to turn that off, and we're going to run things back in Gitlab until we have some problems. So let's go back to our other last test failure, and that's what these are really going to look like. We'll see that it's running, checked out a new repository. It is, we should see this CD. Now it's running our migrations, and we're actually seeing these migrations actually running. So 7 migrations. Now they're loaded into it, and now we're running our tests. And then we're actually going to see all of our tests are actually failing. And we're going to notice something. We are now getting this token expired error. So we actually have learned something. So the really good news is our tests are running. And what we've learned is that the way we have been storing and running our tests using that credential that we had just kind of hard coded in, that's not going to be the route. So if we go to credential, or it would be in our tests. So this bearer token here, we actually are going to want to change this around. We need to do some maybe mocking or something like that. But that's going to be it for today's video. In the next one, we'll take care of that. But yeah, today we talked about how these GitLab CI files work, how these different stages are actually built, and our next one we'll fix up that test. We'll get things going green, and yeah, then we'll see where we go after that. So I'll see you in the next one.